Here's a funny story. I actually meant to start making this video all the way back in April last year, but I got sidetracked in the wait for June and Update 5 and ended up forgetting about it completely. The only reason I remembered about it now is because some months ago it was the official 1 year mark of the devs not releasing a new playable to the public, and I realised a couple days ago how close we are to getting the year 3 anniversary as well. And after going over that in my head for maybe a total of 10 seconds, I suddenly remembered I forgot about the video I have to make. And now here we are almost a whole year after I planned it. For those unaware, it has now been more than 2 years since the Evrimas branch of the Isle launched, with that number going up to 3 in a few months. That is a lot of time for the game to be developed and content to be added. I thought it'd be pretty interesting to go over the first 2 years of development, see what went right, what went wrong, and how the first and second year differ from each other in terms of schedule and content. I also think it's quite important to see how much the term "come back in a year" actually matters, because it has been used in the past on people that are unhappy with the current state of the game. Let it be known that a year of development is not referring to the actual years of 2020 or 2021 or 2022, but referring to an actual year's worth of time between June 19th one year and June 19th the next. I will not be going over performance of updates unless it's an important dip in frames that has to be mentioned, as the Isle has always had poor performance and it doesn't really have much to do with the actual content. Let us begin. With the disappointing release of Evrimas not only missing out on many key features that literally every game has, but also being incredibly poor as far as performance and server lag goes, many were expecting something big to happen and fast. The first bug fix patch to Evrimas happened only 6 days after launch. However, on July 17th, a month after the beta branch launched, they made what would likely be considered the first content update. For now, these will be referred to as mini updates due to not being tied to a big schedule drop of which you'd find on the game's roadmap. Patch 0.4.7.05 added in a few things, like quality of life options for chat, the HUD, Steam communication, and added in the MUD effect and the first iteration of the logout system. Another larger patch, 0.4.14.07, that added Tonanto's claw attack, the quick stand feature, the sleeping part of the logout mechanic, and a few other things like additional footstep sounds and the pack scent mechanic, came out on the 15th of August. This was the second and last big content drop before Update 1. When asking my community, of which over 200 people responded, it seemed that the general rating of this period of Evrimas development was a 1.83 out of 5. Likely held up slightly by some of those quality of life features. Not a good start, and it proved how rushed the launch was when they added so many features in that should have been there already within only a month or so, whilst they also worked on the next update at the same time. But improvements were made and the next drop of content wasn't too far away. Patch 0.5.12.08, commonly referred to by the community and the devs as Update 1, released on September 26 in 2020, marking their first major update release just over 3 months after launch, with the first new playable edition of Dryosaurus alongside our first version of in-game AI, which surprisingly works better than how AI does now. They also added in the grouping system, grazing, fall damage, the alternate bite for Utah, and some quality of life features such as more spawn points on the map and proper interaction hints. There was one patch after this, but it was mostly minor changes and bug fixes, meaning that this was the only patch for the next 2 months until the release of Update 2. Despite this, players still felt this era of the game to be a decent chunk better at a 2.24 out of 5 rating. Patch 0.6.15.18 or Update 2 were released on November 31st or December 1st depending on your time zone. This was the largest update so far by a mile, and in terms of content even larger than the initial release. 3 new dinosaurs of Carnotaurus, Hypsilophodon, and Stegosaurus, all complete with their respective abilities, although Hypsi didn't get growth and still doesn't have it. They also added the bleeding system and meat chunks, crowd control was finally added to Tonanto, and they brought in the first iteration of a day and night cycle. It also added female skins, the ability to view your character on a server in the server list, and proper admin functionality for server owners. This update also decreased the size of the playable map in order to encourage player interaction more, which the community wasn't necessarily happy with. 0.6.20.29 wasn't really a content update, mostly small QOL changes, sound polishing and a few new animations. However, I bring it up because they reverted the map size back to where it was. This was done on the 5th of December, only 4 days later, a fast update to rectify problems that people have with the game. I wish we got more of those nowadays. One small patch later that improved AI, and on December 19th we got another content update in patch 0.6.30.37. work in progress terrain alignment, regional spawning system that is still used to this day, QOL for the HUD in regards to health and blood, where they finally added in the heart icon to track your health, and the addition of some human structures, and they also made a load more attenuations for animations and sound and AI and the other quality of life stuff. Another patch, 0.6.48.29, on January 28th, was made to address some of the desync problems people were dealing with, and also added in regional spawn cooldowns which were sorely needed, and some quality of life stuff for the skybox, animations, sounds, etc. just like before. This patch is often referred to nowadays as 2.5 due to its enhancements and fixes to game optimization and desync. This was the last notable patch for quite a while, but with the amount of attention given to fixes, feedback, and additions shortly after Update 2's drop, I can see how people weren't all that mad about that, which they clearly weren't, as the community score shot up to a 3.69 out of 5. The relatively large majority of people enjoyed this state of the game despite some silence and desync issues. When the stress test for Update 3 came out on April 11th, the servers were so packed they had to constantly add new ones. I feel it's important to bring up this stress test because it only lasted a little more than 2 weeks, and if you know a bit about public update tests, you are fully aware why this will be relevant later. April 30th, patch 0.7.85.04, or Update 3 had the longest wait since the last major update so far at 6 whole months, or 5 and a bit if you want to count the stress test as breaking the wait. Apart from the initial launch, this was probably the most impatient the community had ever been for a big content drop, but it did deliver, as well as 2 new playable additions which brought in 2 new realms of play with Pteranodon and Deinosuchus. They also did a complete remake of the map, some of which preferred and some of which didn't like as much as the old one. The update also added in 2 types of fish AI, the oxygen system and actual drowning, a sort of rebalance and enhancement to the way that bleed works as well as buffing its general effectiveness, the removal of global chat, enhancements to wallowing to tackle how strong it is, and multiple sound, animation and bug fix changes as per usual. A patch based around admin improvements, 0.7.91.13, came a week after the update on May 6, which I count due to the newly found ability to make proper cinematic shots due to the ability to toggle names of players, including some enhancements to server logs to help with admin abuse. Players would only have to wait a month for the next major update, as 0.7.102.30 or Update 3.5 released on May 29th. Bringing the pouncing ability to the juvenile versions of Utahraptor, along with bucking for creatures that were previously too small and got pinned by them. They also added in the interactive water system too. They also changed some growth times and then did the rest of the usual. One more small patch later and the first year of Evrima was over. Despite only being a little higher in terms of rating at 3.74 out of 5, Update 3 had the most 5-star votes on any of these polls by far, more than doubling the amount that Update 2 got, with 19% of people voting for 5 stars. This is the best score that any update gets, and as such can probably be considered the fan favourite Evrima update. The reason that it seems so close to Update 2 is likely due to the conflicting opinions on the map and graphical changes, which boosted the amount of 3 stars this update got by 10%. We will come back later to add everything up, but first we have to get through Year 2. 2 months after the start of Year 2 is when the first patch released, something big no doubt. Unfortunately, yes and no. Patch 0.7.111.31, commonly referred to as Update 3.75 by players, was definitely a big update, but not in the way that anyone wanted. This patch completely overhauled the way stats work and gave pretty much everything balance changes, including universal speed nerfs and giving most creatures attack and health nerfs, except for the apexes. That's right, in the same update that they nerfed the damage and HP of all things that can even think about fighting back against Dino and Stego, they also buffed the HP pool of both of those guys by 2,000 each, as well as other buffs too. Yes, the game needed some balance changes, but all people were really asking for was Dryo damage nerfs and stamina drain on Dino's alt bite, and yet they did all of this. Not to mention that the game's optimization was working about as well as it did when Evrima released, if not worse. Massive frame drops in certain areas, most people being forced to turn down their graphics a notch, and blurrier foliage. It's hard to imagine what the game would look like if the older balance was around today with dinosaurs like Paki, but clearly people were unhappy with this update considering it got the most 1-star ratings out of any update here at 65%, with the overall rating being 1.6.4. The lowest score by a decent chunk, even lower than the initial release despite being an update in a time where the game had 4 times the content than it had back then. Terrible start. However, only a month later, on September 8th, they opened the mechanic test for Update 4, Paki being added into the test branch a month after that as well. This testing phase went on for about 3 whole months. Changes were made during this time, but past the first month and a half there were little tweaks or things tested. The servers were hard to get into due to there not being that many of them, and the ones that we did have would have problems and crash very often. Half of people that played Evrimas ended up playing it, and so felt no excitement when it came for the actual release due to already experiencing everything for way too long, and the other half had to wait until December 16th to actually play it. So when patch 0.8.60.19 did drop, the general reaction was either I've seen all this already and don't care, or they took way too long to make this. But surprisingly, people did not dislike this update too much. It added in Pachycephalosaurus, the diet system, fracture system, new AI, latching for Pteranodon, some map changes including new mud pools which replaced riverside wallowing, death sounds for dinosaurs, and a load of new plants and shit, as well as the usual. I don't think this update would have gotten away with what it did near as much if it weren't for the fact that Pachy was there, which people still mostly enjoy playing. Optimization still seemed to be quite poor, but was an improvement on the previous patch by far. This was the only patch up until March 3rd, and the community rated this era overall as a 2.91 out of 5. Again, an improvement, but definitely disappointing for this stage of the game. Patch 0.8.75.134, referred to as Update 4.5, hosted some pretty notable map changes, including a large change to the northwest area of the map, the addition of a big new river in center, and different spawn locations for diet plants. Pachy finally got a proper juvenile running animation, new visual effects were added, and the usual as well. And a lot of balance changes which most people didn't like, as well as optimization that felt slightly worse than it did before. Since this patch is more notable than others and changed a decent bit about how the game plays, I ran a poll on it too, where it only scored slightly lower than 4 with a 2.89 out of 5 rating. Apart from one small patch, this was the only update to the game until June 19th, 2022, meaning that yes, that was it, as Update 5 didn't release until July 14th, and when it did, it still only got a 2.59 out of 5, a chunky downgrade. So to recap, Year 1 saw 16 patches altogether, 6 of which being mini updates and 4 being major updates. I'm too lazy to count mechanic additions, but new playables introduced adds up to 6, with the average rating for big updates being 2.875 out of 5, making Year 1's average score nearly as big as Year 2's best score. Year 2 saw 4 patches overall, that's 1 patch for every 3 dev blogs, 2 of which being minor updates and 1 being a major update, with 1 playable addition in Pachycephalosaurus. Even being generous and adding in Update 5 since it was in stress testing before Year 2 ended, you only get 1 more major patch, which barely works in favour of the overall score of 2.48, taking it to 2.5 out of 5. Not a big difference, but Year 1 had so much more room to make mistakes and still pulled through, and it's much worse when you remember that Year 2 had the lowest highs as well as the lowest lows. So what do I think went wrong exactly? I mean, a 6 of the playables they managed to add in Year 1, as well as a 4th of the updates? Sure, you can say that Update 4 was a very development heavy update compared to any in Year 1, but even so it still ended up unfinished. I mean a whole update, 2 if you really want to count Update 5, which mostly went towards mechanics that require other mechanics to be a worthwhile addition, not to mention how long they took to add in general, or how long they stayed in the testing phase. You can blame that on whatever background issue you want, but it's very convenient that all these issues happen to post Year 1 content. If they really wanted diets, then organs should have been in the diet update. It's something they likely could have easily added in those 3 mechanic test months, since they already expressed the goal to test stuff one at a time when they did that. Alternatively, diet should have been a release day feature. With how rushed Update 0 was, they absolutely should have spent another year on it, and because diets require playables, they should have also cupped in the first couple updates worth of content into release. People expected more anyway, so it would have been very beneficial, with the branch launching in maybe early 2021 instead of mid-2020, with better impressions. Otherwise, I think it would have been a lot better for them to have missed out on diets in the Pechy update, maybe added a second dino alongside it with the update still coming out before the end of the year, and then spent some of their time on Night Vision and Dilophosaurus, whilst the diet and organ update is referred for Q1 to Q4 of 2022. Alternatively, I think perks should have been worked on post-update 4, which could have worked too. Perks after all would be a lot more fun to deal with, even in a bare-bones state. It's hard to change updates without changing the whole development plan and have it work well, but those were some ideas I put together in like 3 minutes. No matter what you choose to excuse it, I think it's obvious that the community at large has been quite disappointed with the game past some of the first year of development. This continued into Year 3, which is going to end at some point soon. I will have posted 2 polls before this video airs, so if you didn't see them already, please go vote on them, as I will be making a follow-up in a few months when June 19th rolls back around. Thank you everyone for watching, and thank you especially to my patrons for supporting the channel. You can always subscribe if you found this video interesting in any way, it's free to do so, and I want to push for 4K by the year's end, considering I already hit 2K not long ago. That's about it. See ya.